So Steve has just given the complete danger of expectation management now, so I'll apologise up at front because I will disappoint you after that introduction. So thank you, Steve. Now this is the hippie caftan presentation, and I'd like to actually open it by passing on my respects to the elders, the Wurundjeri people, so past and present elders of this. And I think often when we hear that statement at the beginning of a presentation, we have this automatic reaction around political correctness. But I just ask that tonight as you're driving home is just think about what that statement means in terms of take it out of political correctness and reflect on it instead in where we are at in our country's history and the junction we're at about where our future goes. Because if you look at some countries in Europe, and I'll get back to this, I told you it was the hippie caftan presentation, some countries are so wedded to conflict in their history that they will never move forward. Other countries actually take a different approach and embrace about how they manage cultural differences and futures and integration. And Australia has a great history of multiculturalism. Where do we take that in future? And what I want to reflect on as we go through this presentation is what's our job in that. So what I want to talk about, and again this is going to be quite global, this isn't going to be the technical presentation, it's not going to be the presentation about specifically what I did at VicRoads or what VicRoads does or AEMO, although I'm happy to discuss some of that. But what are some of the challenges that we face both globally and as a community? And if you look at things we've got, whether you believe it or not, we've got climate change and certainly some pressures around sustainability in particular. And even if we don't believe in climate change, I think it would be hard to argue that we don't potentially have some significant issues around pollution, and in some parts of the globe more than others. Our social systems globally are reforming, and I was having a conversation with Ken earlier this morning about, you even just look at it in an Australian context, and we on the surface appear to be still working on a 1990s approach around polling and things like that, except we're using Twitter for it, or we're treating Twitter responses and Facebook comments as we historically considered polling within our political systems. What does that have an effect in things like, you look around the globe, around hung parliaments, things like that. So there's a fair bit of social upheaval that cascades then on into our political systems. We've got sustained pockets of poverty and disadvantage in areas of the world. In Australia, we have known issues in particularly our remote Indigenous communities. We have pockets that you know of here in Melbourne, where we have sustained and cyclical areas of poverty and disadvantage, both educationally and economically. We've got rapid global change that is enabled by technology. And that can be a real challenge for how we keep pace and how we actually make sure it goes in the direction that we want it to go in. I use the royal we there. Privacy and security concepts are reforming around us. Our children, our grandchildren, have virtually no concept of privacy. For many of them, from the day they are born, their photos are up on Facebook. So they will actually never know privacy in the way that you and I grew up with it. And particularly as the custodians often of the information, their personal information, our finance information, etc., the concepts around the business leaders of the future are very different to those that we have grown up with. Physical labour appears to be increasingly considered an unattractive option for people. So, and that is a real challenge for us as looking at labour markets and things going into the future. So we've got ageing populations. If young kids don't want to do physical labour, and if, as is discussed, the retirement age gets pushed up to 70, what does that again mean for us in terms of how we manage our workforces? And CIOs is a bit of a challenge, I think. CIOs, CTOs, the IT people, as we're often referred to, are still often seen as being the order takers or the people who are there to serve. And I think that is an enormous challenge for us as an industry, because really we should be there to lead. So that's the challenges. So what are some of the opportunities out there? one of the huge opportunities is that we can enable access to pretty much anything by pretty much anyone. So, you know, we've proven that time and again in our ability to integrate, in our ability to collate, in our ability to make readily available information about most topics. And that is an enormous opportunity to really drive and enable change. We are able to do things cheaper, faster and better. We've proven that. And you go back to, you know, through history, the Industrial Revolution, if you want, go back to the cavemen. We do things better, we do them faster, we do them continually cheaper when you look at price rather than total cost. And so we have a continuing opportunity to do that. Automating the heavy lifting. Again, if you look at us as an industry, and I saw a great show recently on one of the news programs about a gentleman who'd had an accident on a motorbike, and his business was installing pools in people's backyards. So he found himself in a wheelchair, and he still runs that business. He actually still does the delivery of the pools. It was a great show because it really, in fact, showed how technology is able to actually overcome what we perceive as barriers. And it's very much often a perception of barrier rather than a reality of a barrier if you're able to overcome it. And capitalism. Capitalism as a system, and there's some great reading I did recently from Michael Porter around capitalism as a system is increasingly seeing future sustainable social benefit as a pillar of economic success. So that's beyond the day of, you know, triple bottom line. It's beyond the piece around philanthropy and things like that. It is actually really strong positive business sense to be able to clearly demonstrate that you are adding to the prosperity and the livability of our future. So with those as backdrops, there are some enormous opportunities for us as an industry. And so where are some of the areas where you can just look at and you can see some sensational examples of where, as an industry, we've kicked into that? If you have a look at things such as Kiva and the social enterprises that are being set up for fundraising, for whether they be small startup companies, whether they be, again, putting funding into economically disadvantaged areas, to the old one, teach people how to fish rather than give the fish. There are some things there that we have used social media and technology to kick in with and drive. Overcoming disability, that picture there is Graeme Innes, who's one of the Human Rights Commissioners. And if you've never had the opportunity to hear Graeme speak, well worth it. You sit there and you watch him on a panel, and as he's speaking, he's tweeting away and doing things, and he genuinely gets how our industry can make a difference. And so he is absolutely inspiring to not just listen to, but to watch how he works. We've got things like lower emission, higher output devices. You know, we've gone in with a whole lot of stuff again so that we're able to deliver more in a sustainable way. You look at things like, you know, and you can argue again, has it been short-term better or worse, but things like the Arab Spring and things like that, that technology has really been one of the key enablers to. And one that is dear to my own heart is internet shopping. If you want to look at change, a really significant disruptive change, the use of the internet for 24/7, shop from anywhere, shop around for price in the space of about 15 minutes, then that is one of the examples where there is some really direct and at a very, very individual layer, change that has had a massive impact on the way companies work. Again, it's shifted some of the perceptions that we had around the whole economic model that we work within. And in general, we are living longer. We're living longer and we're in general living better quality lives. And a lot of that is technology enabled. We heard yesterday some of the conversation around doing telehealth and things like that. And the example that was given of the 80-year-old woman who no longer needs to travel, she can receive high quality medical care at home. Those types of examples are where we as an industry are really making a difference to how people live. And that's when you look at all of the industries, ours more than any other has the ability to change lives. So the question for me is actually how do we do more of that, because I think we are a long way yet from actually realising the potential of our industry. And there are huge opportunities. If you look at some of the things that can come out, is if we go back to those challenges that I mentioned at the start, breaking cycles of disadvantage, and that's not just about doing the right thing for the disadvantaged people, but if you run a business case around if you can get all of the population highly productive, as an economic model, it makes enormous sense. And when you look at our ability to, and Ken and I were again talking about this earlier, our ability collectively to go in and make a complete difference to the way Indigenous communities are able to access services and actually run business models, we could do something there. We could really make a difference. When you look at cycles of poverty, if you look around Melbourne, if you take an example of take any housing commission block in Melbourne, is there something again collectively that we could be doing that changes the paradigm of how the cycles and how the systems, the ecosystems around them operate? I really think there's something that we could be doing there. I spoke before about if you look back through history, we talked about emerging economic models and where the economic models now is becoming genuine around making a difference in future. One of the things that was reassuring for me that is in terms of understanding, because you can often look ahead and say it's all doom and gloom, but not so long ago it was globally considered acceptable to have child labour. Now that is the case in some, in certainly a shrinking footprint around the world. Again, what can we do about that as an industry? And part of that is around shifting again the balance as to how people operate, what their expectations are of how they work, and giving them a different model, particularly in the education sector. Creating reliability and productivity from uncertainty. And the example around that is sort of near and dear to my heart in my new role is renewable energies. Is if you have a look at that, renewable energies are anyone would argue, are not a good thing for the future. They are. The question is, how do you make that reliable? So how do you get solar power to be predictable and reliable? And so there are some real challenges in there. If we can crack that nut, it opens up the paradigm on renewables and things like that. So there are some real challenges there that as an industry we have the capacity to step up and into. I think I've touched on most of those. And sustainability. Sustainability alongside prosperity and livability is the footprint that we are going to leave behind and the sustainability going on into the future. If you look across all industries, if you look across construction industries, mining, health, etc., increasingly all of them are enabled and driven by us. So that, again, challenge for me is if we're going to really add to sustainability and prosperity and livability all at the same time, is we have the ability to do that. And why do I think it's us? It's, very boldly, I do think we're smarter than the average bears. I think if you have a look around our industry, and you look at the people who are attracted to it, you look at the people who are successful in it, they are really, really smart. And that is not to say that there aren't smarter people who are in the health industry. It's not to say there aren't smarter people who are operating in the financial sectors and that. But as an industry, we are consistently, through all of our services and things, we have a higher rate of change in our industry than any other. And we spoke yesterday, we heard in a number of the panels, you've heard that comment about what's the hardest and most important piece, it's managing change. And we have an innate ability to do that. So what I think one of the things we've got is that we've got really, really smart people. We've also got a capacity to run the business case for dramatic change. I think, though, that we've got a whole lot of things that we need to work on as CIOs and as an industry to be able to leverage that. And a couple of them are things like, we often, the conversation around, we've heard it the last few days, is it Chief Digital Officer, is it Chief Information Officer, is it Chief Technology Officer? I've got to say from my perspective, I really don't care. What I do care about is that we respect all of those disciplines that sit within that framework, and we work together and we don't compete with each other or see one as better or worse than the other. One of the things that I've been really, really conscious of in the roles that I've had is I'm not the technologist in the room. The man who is my mentor, in fact, is pretty much my hero, he is a chief technologist. I will never, ever, ever be as good as he is at the technology. He runs absolute rings around me. But I have different skills to him that I hope complement those that he has. And I see the strength in the way that he and I relate and talk to each other, and we don't work together, but is about the way we complement each other, and each of us, I hope, makes the other one better. That again for me is then a paradigm I take into how I work with industry. If I knew how to run a data centre better than the data centre companies, if I knew how to build applications better than the application builders, I should be in those industries. I'm not. My role is, in fact, is to work with you and to find out if I can understand what the business needs are, then I'd like to be able to go to you for solutions, but also the flip side. If I can get you to tell me what the technology opportunities are because you know so much more than I do, my role is then to advocate for you back into the business and make the business better. And I think that really richness of relationship across the sectors of our industry is something we still haven't got maturity in. I think we have very, very quickly evolved from a core technology industry where we were largely recruited based on our technical currency and our availability. If you go back 20 years ago, that was a really large piece of how we were recruited. As the recruiters now, we need to make sure we're not implicitly or subconsciously doing that. So we need to be outcomes-based recruiting. We need to be potential-based recruiting. And so that will make a significant difference, I think, to how we shape our industry and how we build our capabilities into the future. Diversity. If we are going to really be able to, deliver consumer-based services that make a difference to all sectors of the community, all sectors of business, then our industry needs to reflect our customers. So, the most obvious one is the male-female balance. That's the one that visibly stands out the most. I don't think women are smarter than men. I don't think men are smarter than women. I think we're different. I think we're equivalent. I think we have an industry issue, and women is just a visible example of it. We have an issue with diversity across our industry that's a problem for us as an industry going forward if we're really going to, again, leverage capacity and deliver and meet all of the opportunities that we could. And so how do we work on that? It's not about giving people preferential treatment, but it might be about putting in a bit more effort to develop them. It might be actually, again, making sure that we focus on capability and potential, not realised experience yet. So as the leaders in our industry, which at our level we are, we need to be consciously doing this. And the question I guess I would throw out to you, I think it's an industry issue. So it's not an issue for me as a woman. My career is going along, swimming along fine. But I do have an issue when I look around my teams and they don't understand the businesses and the communities we're trying to service because they don't actually have representation of them there. So that again is something I think that we have an obligation as CIOs and leaders to address. I think we have a really key role our role is to broker, to interpret and to advocate for change. And that partly comes back to that piece I said about the relationships between us. But it's also, let's not stand back in the corner. I think we need to be actually really focusing on our abilities as leaders to influence, to be at the front table when the strategies are being developed. And that actually comes from us as individuals. We can't stand back and wait to be asked. We need to make sure that we are asked because we're really highly valued, but because, if you picture yourself in a room with a bunch of people, the ones who stand out are the ones that have developed their ability to lead and influence. Every single one of us needs to be one of those. So in terms of what do we need to do, and again, this is my personal opinion. So What I think we really need to do is we've got to be the leader in the room. As I mentioned, one of the things I throw at my own managers is we've got a tendency to develop leaders when they first get promoted into a leadership role, and then we set and forget. One of the examples I set personally is I tell my team the only days that I am uncontactable ever are the 2 days a quarter I go off and do a leadership learning group. Other than that, they can contact me anyway, but those 2 days I tell them no, because that's when I get my headspace for how I try and look at how I'm leading for the future. Getting involved in research, getting involved in education, leading development, all of that, both encouraging and inspiring that in our teams, but doing it ourselves, is if we think we're there yet, then we're definitely not. Because it's that constant thirst for learning, and again, as the leaders of an industry of such rapid change, we need to be the ones that are visibly seen to be the continually evolving people. And you look at those statistics that Gary Watley put up at the dinner on the first night. Whether we believe those statistics are right or not, or whether they are as they should be, they are the statistics, and they are consistently the statistics. For those who weren't there, what it shows is that there is a much lower perception amongst chief executives and business executives of our performance than there is amongst our cohort. There is a much lower perception of the value that we add amongst them than there is amongst us. Now, whether that is right or not isn't the issue. If the perception exists, that's what we as the leaders need to be addressing. Because it's not just affecting our careers, it's affecting our effectiveness of our business units, and it's limiting the difference that we can make. If we're only being asked to deliver to requirements, if we're not being asked to drive the strategy and bring in the opportunities, it's not enough. And so we need to be making sure that we're at the front seat of the table. And part of that is knowing how to run a business. It again comes back to that being smarter than the average bear. It's being able to sit there and defend and clearly articulate your financial value. It's being able to actually deal with the difficult conversations, both internally, externally, the stakeholders, with the board. It's actually showing that the business that we run is information access, it's business intelligence, it's data centres, it's all of those pieces wrapped up into one. But fundamentally, it is making the output business better. What we've got to show is we can run our business at least as well, if not better, than they can run theirs. So just some food for thought at the end. As I mentioned, Michael Porter. On the leadership side, Horatio Nelson, the Band of Brothers approach. I have to say I'm a big subscriber to that one. Using Twitter, I don't know how many of you actively use Twitter. I get more information off Twitter and education about my industry from Twitter than I do from anywhere. The leadership circle, if you want to have a look in some of that stuff around our positioning of ourselves as of the leaders in both our industry but also across our businesses. Places like the Australian Institute of Company Directors, and the ones that I haven't put up there but because I sort of take them as implicit, the Australian Computer Society. I'll put a plug in for the Victorian ICT for Women, which I'll put more than a plug in, actually a request as well. But making sure again that both we're using all of those, but that our teams and our peers see us using them. Is if you can be the person who's actually taking out the development pieces for others, you are suddenly seen as the leader in the group. And that's when you actually are able to really influence and have a voice at the table. And on that, I spoke before about one of our most obvious things around diversity. I would put a request out, come and see me afterwards. In terms of getting women, particularly women at senior levels, retained in our industry and working effectively, we need guest speakers, we need mentors, and we need people in our industry, particularly men, who are prepared to host events for women in ICT. Because it's really important, it's not a women's issue, it's an industry issue. And you lead the industry. So I'd really ask you, implore you in fact, for the benefit of our future as an industry, is come on board and as an individual, have a look at what you can do, because I don't know yet any avenues where we as a collective, as CIOs, can work. So again, Ken and I were discussing this morning, if we decided as an industry sector we wanted to do something about Indigenous communities, I haven't got a clue at the moment how we would do that as a collective. But I'm positive, I'm so certain that we could. So if anyone has any ideas on that, I'd be more than happy to take them on board. That's it, the sermon from the pulpit on Susan. I told you it was going to be the hippie caftan presentation. It's really just food for thought, because I think we, if you just look at the people who are sitting in this room, I think we are probably realising about 60% of our collective potential at the moment. And that's a hell of a lot of potential. Potential is worth nothing if it is not realised. So thank you for your patience and for listening. It's greatly appreciated.